Yo!
Let's synchronize.
What is up, guys? VULKan here, and today I am starting off kind of the beginning of a new series on my channel. I am not going to be making videos like this every single video, but this is more of a video to set up what will be my future videos. So my plan for this channel is to start making videos where I explain a deck and I explain how to play the deck versus every archetype. I want to keep these videos under 20 minutes long and maybe do 1 or 2 live battles in the video, but most of it would just be me showing clips and explaining how to play the deck in pretty much every situation. And because of that, I decided I need to come up with a list of decks that I would show how to win against. And this video is going to be covering the list of the 12 decks that I think are most predominant in Clash Royale and are the most common to go up against. You'll find that I didn't add Royal Giant to this list, and that's just because I don't think Royal Giant is really even that good of a card. It's used a lot in the lower arenas, but once you get to anywhere in Legendary Arena, it's just not really that predominant anymore, and it's really not used that much in Tournament Standard. So I'm going to leave Royal Giant out of this list because I just don't think it's that good of a card. The only reason people use it is because they can overlevel it really easily. So first up on our list is Giant Beatdown. Giant is one of the first cards that you unlock in the game, and pretty much everyone can use Giant. It is frequently paired with Prince and Dark Prince because they have really good synergy with Giant, since they don't really die to spells. Even if you throw a rocket at a Prince or a Dark Prince, it's not going to die. And because of that, you can build up monster pushes that are really hard to defend. And you'll also notice that it's frequently paired with a miner. This is because if you have the miner in the deck, the miner is really good at clearing out pumps. And also, it serves as kind of a pseudo win condition because say your opponent has Inferno Dragon or P.E.K.K.A, you can churn your Giant deck into a miner chip deck and often beat decks that a normal Giant deck could not beat. Next up, we have Golem. Golem is one of the oldest archetypes in the game. It's been around since beta, and really it has always revolved around the elixir pump. It used to be not that good because Inferno Tower was really predominant in the meta and would shut down pretty much any Golem deck. But since then, the Inferno Tower has been nerfed, and also it's just not as good versus all the bait decks that are going around, versus it's not really that good versus Dark Prince versus Prince. So Golem has become pretty popular. Third, we have Hog Cycle. So what is Hog Cycle? Hog Cycle is the deck that has finished #1 on ladder the most times. I think if you look at all the #1 finishes on ladder, Hog has probably been in over 50% of the decks. I don't know that for a fact, but I think there's some really solid evidence to prove that. It's a really solid deck that revolves around being aggressive and outcycling your opponent's cards. Because the elixir cost for a Hog deck is so cheap, you can frequently play your Hog Rider, then go on defense, and then wait for your opponent to attack you, and then after they've attacked you, they won't be back to their counters to your Hog yet, and you can throw the Hog at the bridge again and get a ton of damage. And it's just really has always been one of the best decks in the game, even after its most recent nerf. Next up, we have Spellbait. Spellbait is pretty easily explained by the name. The real purpose of the deck is to bait out your opponent's spells and play that Goblin Barrel when they don't have Log in hand, when they don't have a good counter to Goblin Barrel. A lot of times when you have Spellbait, you can outcycle your opponent's spells if you play, because Spellbait decks are usually pretty cheap. And also, it's really important that whenever you're using a Spellbait deck, you really want to be playing pretty aggressive, because if you don't play aggressive and you let your opponent stack up a huge push, then they're just going to be able to overwhelm you and take you down. It's finished #1 on ladder multiple times and is really solid. Spellbait used to really revolve around Inferno Tower, but since the recent Inferno Tower nerfs, and just as I said earlier, because of the Prince and Dark Prince and how useless Inferno Tower is against them, it's kind of fallen out of the meta and has really started revolving around Tornado, and Some people even use Sparky and Giant with this spellbait. It's really the purpose of a spellbait deck is to make you use your spell on what you don't want them to use your spell on. So usually what your opponent wants to do is save their spell for your Goblin Barrel or for your minion horde, but really the purpose of spellbait is to make them waste that fireball on your minion horde, waste that poison on your minion horde, waste that log on your goblin gang, and then after they do that, you're free to go in with whatever troops you have in your hands that won't die to whatever spell they have in hand. And overall, it's just really a solid deck that has a really quick cycle and is honestly pretty fun to play. Moving on, we have Three Musketeers. So Three Musketeers is another hated deck and loved deck. Some people love it, some people hate it. A lot of people think it has a really low skill cap, but personally, I believe it has a pretty high skill cap. It's easy to kind of get into, you know, and win a couple matches, but if you really want to be good at Three Musketeers and win consistently, like every or 90% of your games, it is insanely hard to use. It's been around for a long time. Originally, when Three Musketeers came out, they cost 10 elixir, so it wasn't used that much, but recently people started pairing it with Elixir Pump. They've paired it with Battle Ram, with Bandit, with Dark Prince, with Hog Rider, and it's really just become one of the most predominant decks in the meta. You'll find whenever you use or play against Three Musketeers that really the main purpose of the deck is just to build up an elixir advantage, and the way you're going to do that is place a pump in the back, and what you hope is either that if your opponent like fireballs or poisons or uses a spell on your pump, then you can play those Three Musketeers in the back or defend the Three Musketeers and counter push, and if they don't play that spell on your pump, then you can build up a huge elixir advantage and play the Three Musketeers multiple times until you outcycle their spell and finish off your opponent. Moving on again, we have Mortar Cycle. Mortar is another one of the most hated decks of the game. And the reason it's hated is not because it's a skillless card, not because it's easy to use. The reason I think it's hated is because anyone who's good at Mortar knows that you have to be really aggressive with the deck. And a lot of times you'll find that versus Mortar players, they'll be playing their Mortar when they're on like just reaching for elixir, just in hopes that you don't have enough elixir in your hand to defend their Mortar. And really, it's all about outcycling your opponent and putting them in awkward situations. And because of this really aggressive playstyle that is necessary to win with Mortar, a lot of people just hate it because it seems like, oh, these guys are playing it in a really skillless way, which is kind of true, but I also think it has a high skill cap. But you also have to be really, if you want to really master Mortar, you have to memorize your opponent's hands, memorize what cards they have in cycle, and I think that it does take skill to be in, say, like the top 200 with Mortar. It's more of a ladder deck than a tournament standard deck because you can tie a lot with Mortar, but I think there is a decent amount of skill that comes to it, more than people give it credit for. Now, moving on, we have the Lava Hound. The Lava Hound was not in the game in beta. It was introduced in the game a couple months after it came out, and originally people were just playing Lava Hounds. You know, they weren't really thinking about pairing it with Balloon, but in more recent days, you'll find that every Lava Hound deck has either Miner or Balloon. And this is just because if you put a Balloon behind a Lava Hound, the Lava Hound has so much HP, it is so hard to destroy. And when the Balloon is behind it, you have to destroy the Lava Hound and the Balloon, and it really can just do some insane damage to your tower. And it's also really strong against decks that don't have a lot of air counters. And even against decks that do have a lot of air counters, you can use your spells to take out those air counters. It used to dominate the game a couple months ago, but since then it's kind of toned down a bit, but it definitely is still solid, and Botcham even finished number 3 in the world last season with it. Next, we have Balloon Cycle. Now, Balloon Cycle is, I think, one of the most high skill cap decks in the game. Not that many people use Balloon. I know Pompeo has finished number 1 in the world with it at least twice, and I think even 3 times. And you'll find that it's not that easy to use because you can't just be playing Balloon willy-nilly. You have to know what cards are in your opponent's hand. You have to have enough elixir to play your spells on whatever your opponent defends with. And really, it's not that easy to use because you also have to be able to defend on low elixir a lot of times. It's not like the Hog deck. You don't just want to be playing balloon as much as possible, but you also don't just want to sit back and, you know, only defend and wait for your opponent to make the move. A lot of times you do have to go in with that balloon pretty early in the game. And the reason the miner's paired with the balloon is because the balloon has a ton of death damage, and because of this, often the balloon deck can kind of turn into more of a chip deck. You can play that balloon, make them waste that tornado, make them waste their air counter, and then after they've defended that air counter, you send in the miner, and the miner chip gets chip damage on the tower. The balloon gets the death damage on that tower. So a lot of times with a balloon cycle deck, you can win the game without even getting the balloon to the tower one time, just because of the miner, just because of the spells. And overall, it's just a really solid deck that takes a little while to learn, but after you do, it's really amazing. Next, we have Miner Control. Now, Miner Control is another high skill cap deck. You have to defend with this deck really efficiently. You can't just throw, say your opponent throws a hog at the bridge. You don't want to throw bats, Tesla, log, and goblin all at the same time. You know, you want to defend in the most efficient manner, and then after you've gained an elixir advantage from defending, you can throw that miner at the tower to chip, and your opponent hopefully won't have enough elixir to defend both your miner and whatever troops you have counter pushing. And then a lot of the miner decks, they also rely heavily on spell damage. Like say your opponent draws a Musketeer in the back, you got to put that poison on the Musketeer, get the spell damage on the tower, and overall you just want to slowly chip out your opponent while defending well. I don't think Mortar Cycle has ever finished #1 in the world, just because it's a really slow deck, and usually when you verse a miner deck on ladder you can draw it, but it's always been really solid in tournament standard, and it's definitely a deck to look out for. It's also frequently paired with P.E.K.K.A. I didn't put P.E.K.K.A. in its own deck archetype just because P.E.K.K.A. is not really win condition, but it pairs really well with the miner because P.E.K.K.A. is just such an amazing defensive card, and then it can counter push, tank for the miner, and help you win a lot of games. And moving on, we have Graveyard Control. Now, Graveyard is probably my favorite deck in the game. It's not the only deck I play. I play every deck in the game, but I've just always loved Graveyard. And I think that Graveyard is just a great deck for learning how to defend properly without overcommitting and how to counter push. With Graveyard, you never want to go Ice Golem Graveyard at the bridge at the start of the game. You always want to defend first, figure out what cards your opponents have in hand, and then you want to throw the Ice Golem, and you want to combo with the Graveyard. Whatever troops you have counter pushing, you want to stack up. Like a lot of times you prepare Goblin Hut with it. You want to stack up Goblin Huts. Wait for your opponent either A, to have their counters out of hand, B, to be low on elixir, or C, to if you have a counter push, you can throw in that Graveyard and make sure you have enough elixir for the poison. You can poison all their troops and just get a ton of damage on their tower. And it's really a solid deck. It used to be paired with Freeze a lot, and it used to be really solid, but it's kind of fallen out of the meta. It still works though with this double minion deck that I made a month ago, but a lot of times you'll see it's more commonly paired with Poison and Goblin Hut because you want to bait out that poison, and then as soon as you bait out the poison, because poison hard counters Graveyard, you can throw in the Graveyard and win the game. Moving on, again, we have Expo Cycle. Now, Expo is one of the decks that's finished #1 in the world multiple times. It is just so solid. It also has a high skill cap. With Expo, you want to defend with as little elixir as possible, and once you defend with as little elixir as possible, you can counter push with that Expo. You play it at the bridge, and then it shoots across your opponent's side of the arena. You'll find that a lot of Expo decks, it relies on spell damage, and what you really want to do is you want to get that Expo to lock onto your opponent's tower early in the game, before double elixir. You really want to get a lot of damage with your Expo, and then after that you can just play defense and finish off your opponent's towers with spells. Some people hate this deck, but I don't think it really deserves the hate because it's just it's not easy to use, and I mean, try taking Expo, try winning a bunch of games with it. It's really not that good. I know that in order to use the Expo Tesla deck, it took me, I think, 12 grand challenges to really master it, to even get one win, and it's taken more than that to master the deck. So It's not easy to use, but once you do master this deck, master the defense, master how to defend without overcommitting, then you'll find that it will work miracles in winning against your opponent. And finally, we have what I call hybrid decks. Now, the reason I call it hybrid decks is because I couldn't really find 4 bridge spam decks. Originally, it was just going to be bridge spam, but I decided to throw in this Sim City deck, as I like to call it, in the bottom right, which relies on building up a ton of huts and just making your opponent waste that poison and overwhelming your opponent with those huts. And then in the top right deck with the P.E.K.K.A, the Executioner, that deck is more of it's a counter push deck. It's more commonly used on ladder, but it kind of doesn't really have a win condition, and you'll see there's a couple decks in the meta like that. So I guess that's the deck that I consider that has no win condition. And then on the bottom, or on the bottom left and the top left, those are bridge spam decks. The main purpose of a bridge spam deck is to pretty much defend and then counter push on your opponent with the battle ram. It really revolves around the battle ram. And the battle ram is a really interesting card. It doesn't fit into a lot of decks, but the decks that it does fit into, it works miracles, and it's just really, really powerful. Now, a lot of people used to hate this deck because it used to be paired with Night Witch, and it used to just be so insanely strong. But since the Night Witch nerf, it's not been quite as good and hasn't been so predominant in the meta, so I think it's kind of been toned down to get a fair amount to where it's viable, but it's not too strong. And I think it'll stick around in the meta for quite some time and stay as one of the better decks in the game. So it looks like that's going to wrap up the video. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to making mastery deck guides in the future. VULKan out.